Mr. Badillo.
Yes, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon on Walden's Pond. It's a pleasure having you here with us. I discovered your book a few weeks ago, and I've been reading it. I found it most fascinating about, I understand this is your first book. Is that correct?
Well, actually, I wrote a book about Attica, the Attica prison riots.
Okay.
The 1971, because I was a negotiator there during that riot where so many people were killed.
Yes. But this is your first really kind of autobiographical book, right?
Yeah, but also it involves a lot of important policy issues for the country.
Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, how come you waited to this point in time to write a book like this?
Well, I've been talking about these issues throughout my political career, especially when I was chairman of the board of the city university, and before that, when I was deputy mayor, when I've been trying to bring about change in some of the dysfunctional practices of the educational system. But that's a very difficult thing to do, and that's why I wrote this book, to point out that the Hispanic community particularly is not doing well in school. Very high percentage of kids don't even graduate from high school. Not that a high school diploma means anything these days, because you need to go on to college and beyond. But the Hispanic population, I think we all now realize this as a result of the immigration issue. Hispanic population is now the largest ethnic group in the country. We make up 15% of the population of the United States, 42 million people, and we're going up to over 100 million people, 25%. And if the group as large as 15 to 25% of the U.S. population is not doing well in school, that is a matter which is a crisis for the entire country.
Mm-hmm. In reading your book and when you describe these issues, I was reminded a little bit of Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby, of course, he's been going around the country discussing similar themes about education and lack of achievement. And would you consider yourself someone in that vein?
Well, I'm glad Cosby is doing it, and I think many more people should be doing it, because it's an issue that affects especially the African American and Hispanic community. And the reality is that our young people are not learning, and that is, as I mentioned, a national crisis, because the answer to poverty is not having government come in and provide jobs for all and housing for all and education and health care for all, but getting a good education. Because if you get a good education, you'll be able to get your own job, your own housing, your own health care, and provide for your family's needs. If you don't get a good education, you'll be stuck in poverty for your whole life. So it's a very crucial issue. There is an answer to poverty, and that is getting a good education.
Some of this comes from your very own personal background. For people who don't know, I'm sure people do know, because you have been in the public eye for a long time. You're one of the pioneers in particularly in New York politics, New York State politics. You grew up in Puerto Rico under somewhat adverse circumstances.
Yes, I was born in Puerto Rico. My father died when I was a year old because of an epidemic of tuberculosis. My mother, when I was 5, also of tuberculosis. Most of my family, the same. And when I was about 12, an aunt brought me to New York City, and I worked my way through junior high school, college, and law school. Became a lawyer and a certified public accountant, and then I went into politics. So I know how difficult it is to be bouncing from one household to another, and how difficult it is to go to work full-time and also have to go to college full-time. But nevertheless, I believe the effort has to be made, because that's the only way you can get ahead in this country.
And of course, in reading your book, you were one of the You've changed your positions over the years, obviously, about a lot of things. You were one of the pioneers in the Congress. You really initiated bilingual education programs. You were very forceful in making sure that Latinos are able to advance in different sectors of the society. You've been out there on the forefront on all these different issues, and but reading through your chapters. And I want to get back to some of your schooling. You have one chapter in here about social promotion, and you've been very critical about that, about how we promote children in the educational system. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yes, I hope that everyone will read my book and look into the areas where I mention what makes the educational system dysfunctional. That is a disaster for everybody in the nation. There are things like social promotion, which exists here in New York City. Social promotion means that you are promoted because you get to be a year older, not because you learned anything. And many of the kids are put in classes, especially Black and Latino kids, where they are passed from one grade to the other without learning anything. The parents believe that, in fact, they are learning, but they're not. And when they get to the 9th or 10th grade, they're so far behind in course content that they drop out and never graduate from high school. That idea of social promotion is the most pernicious practice that we could possibly have, and everyone should oppose that. I call upon everyone listening to me now to make sure that they write to the chancellor and they write to whoever the person in charge of education is, wherever they are, and tell them that we have to get rid of the practice of social promotion. You know, it's justified by people saying that it's sociologically bad for a child to be left behind. But I say it's sociologically worse for a child to be 17 years old and not be able to read or write or do math.
In your personal case, how did you advance in it? Because you came here and reading your book, it was very difficult for you that you could not speak English.
That's right. I had to learn to speak English, but I realized at a very early age that if you want to get ahead in this country, you have to be able to learn to speak English. And that is why when I went to Congress, I was the chief sponsor of the Bilingual Education Act. Purpose of the act was to help the kids like me to learn to speak English, and at the same time that they're learning to speak English, to get the course content in Spanish so that they could keep up to par with the other students while they're learning to speak English. That was a great idea. But what's happened since then is that I intended that the course content in Spanish should only be about 18 months. But now it's going on for 4 years, 6 years, and 8 years. That's not what I intended. That's not what Congress intended. And that is very harmful to the society.
You've also changed your position over the years, and reading your book is some very historic pictures in here of you with very people who we all recognize in politics. Some are still around, some are unfortunately deceased. You write in your book that, and this is controversial in some ways, you went from being what you call a Kennedy Democrat to a Giuliani Republican. What happened here?
Well, I started out as the chairman of the Kennedy for President campaign in 1960 in East Harlem, and got a lot of Hispanics and blacks registered to vote for Kennedy. And I was a supporter of Kennedy and of Lyndon Johnson, and I was a very liberal Democrat. In those days, however, it was believed that government could end the war on poverty, but we lost that war. And now, as I mentioned earlier, we recognize that government is not going to solve the problems, that we have to rely upon ourselves. And that's why I say to the parents, especially of Hispanic children, not to rely on the educators, but to go into the school system, to meet with the teachers and the principals, to verify that the child can, in fact, read and write. Have him write an essay at home and have him read it to ensure that he gives a priority to education. Because if you wait until he's in the 9th or 10th grade and you find out he has not been learning, it is too late.
Was there any particular thing that made you shift your politics over the years?
A lot of the people I supported after I became president of the Bronx, a lot of the elected officials, continue even today to talk about the fact that government is going to solve the problems. And we keep telling them it's not going to happen. Believe me, that is very bad advice to be giving to people. They continue to rely upon government to do everything. That's the worst advice you can give to people. Not that it would be great if they could do it, but the fact is they're not going to do it. But they refuse to change their point of view. And we see it even in the current presidential candidates who are talking, many of them, especially in the Democratic Party, as if they could go in and solve the problems like poverty and health care, when in fact that's not likely to happen.
But government, as you point out, and when you were in the Congress, you certainly helped in that case, and in many bills. The government has been a helping hand, a leg up for many people, a cushion for when, particularly during the Depression, when FDR had the New Deal and of course the Great Society. Those programs helped many people gain a leg out of poverty.
Yeah, those programs, programs like Medicare,
right,
Social Security, have been very useful. But I'm talking about the question of government providing jobs for all or housing for all. I know because I used to be a housing commissioner too, that this is not likely to happen. And it's the worst advice because a lot of people believe this, especially when it comes from their elected officials. And that's the worst advice you can give to people.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask about this because you have, and in forward, your book is written by Mr. Rudolph Giuliani.
Right.
Rudolph Giuliani was mayor, of course, in the city for 8 years. He was a very controversial figure among black and Latinos here. A lot of people felt that, frankly, he gave the back of his hand to the African American community. Some people feel he loathed black people. And
yep.
I'm sorry, in 1993, you aligned yourself with Mr. Giuliani in a so-called fusion ticket. A lot of people were very upset by that. People thought you had turned your back on your decades of Democratic support, accused you of betrayal or disloyalty. What happened for you to shift your allegiances?
Well, we had a very specific program. Rudy Giuliani and I had long talks, and I became convinced that he was capable of reducing crime. Because in those days, it was believed that crime could not be reduced until you eliminated poverty. And because poverty couldn't be eliminated, nothing could be done about crime. Rudy and I agreed that criminals are the ones who commit the crime and that we should go after them and not wait until poverty is removed. And Rudy also agreed with me on eliminating social promotion and on improving the educational system. So because we were agreed on those principles, that's why we joined the fusion ticket. And in fact, crime was reduced to an unbelievable degree, and Mayor Bloomberg has continued that to the present time. And also I was able to reduce social promotion, eliminate social promotion in the colleges because it had become, the idea of social promotion has tended to college work. And when I became chairman of the board of the City University, we found there were graduating kids at Ostos Community College who could not pass a written test in English. We found they were giving degrees in education to people who could not pass the teacher's exam in English. There was a Puerto Rican fellow who got a degree in education, took the teacher's exam 12 times and failed it, and was still teaching. And when asked why he couldn't pass it, he said, well, questions are very difficult. By a guy by the name of Robert Frost, the guy with the poems. That individual should never have gotten a college degree. And so I got rid of open admissions. And now the University of the City of New York is back to being what it was when I went there, and that is the Harvard of the poor.
Well, you know, some people, as you well know, and I don't need to tell you because you were in the middle of those battles, said that the end of open admissions, frankly, was racist.
Well, the fact is that the university has improved. The worst racist thing is to give a degree to kids who can't speak English. To have a guy get a degree in education, then he can become a teacher. To have the fellow get a degree from CUNY Law School who cannot pass the bar exam. That's the kind of thing that was even more racist, because you are leading kids into a road that leads nowhere. And that is what I changed. And now the whole university is much better.
Do you think that Mr. Giuliani has a hostile attitude toward African Americans?
No, not at all. The point is, as I mentioned, that he really believed and he proved that you could cut down crime, which benefited African Americans most and Hispanics the most, because during the Dinkins administration, there were over 2,000 murders a year, mostly African American and Hispanics. Today, they're down to a little over 500. And so many thousands of people's lives have been saved, and that proves that it was a benefit to African Americans and Hispanics.
But what about his tough police tactics? The Amadou Diallo case, many other shootings, and the Louima case.
Even today, when you have Mayor Bloomberg, whenever someone is killed by a policeman, everybody wants the policeman indicted. What Rudy said, what Bloomberg is saying now, we got to wait and have it investigated to find out what happened. But there were demonstrations then, there are demonstrations now, that automatically want to indict any policeman who shoots a person. That is a wrong thing to do, because the fact is policemen protect us. And nobody talks about the fact that there are many criminals, black criminals, Hispanic criminals, who kill people. Nobody goes after those individuals. They only talk about when a policeman kills a person. But what we're saying is when that happens, there is a process that has to be carried out.
Let's talk. By the way, you do talk about racism here in the city, and you say that the city itself right now, when you were in public life, really in public life when you had held public office, and now it's very segregated. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, of course. You see that when you go in the subways, when you walk around the Upper East Side and Wall Street, where I think your station is located.
Yes,
you would not know that the city of New York is overwhelmingly black and Hispanic. You know that when you go into the subways. It is actually a very segregated city.
Mm-hmm. Let's move out the realm of city politics and talk about national politics, because this promises the next 18 months or so promises to be one of the more exciting periods in American history. Let's talk about immigration, because it's something that you're very familiar with. The immigration issue has taken over the country in many ways. We've had the Minutemen on the border. We've had the Congress wrestling over this issue. We've had people calls for putting a wall up. I've had people on talking about that. As an immigrant to this country, and as one of the more distinguished immigrants to this country, how do you feel about this whole issue?
Well, I'm glad the issue has come to the forefront and that President Bush brought it to the forefront, because I've known about the problem for many, many years, and I've talked with many Latin American leaders about it. But only now are the American people coming to realize that there has been a huge migration of illegal immigrants into the United States in the past 60 years, a number larger in numbers and scope than the European immigration in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And that is why we are now the largest ethnic group. But that is a serious problem, because we're getting 12, maybe 15 or 20 million people who are not assimilating into our culture, who have no way of becoming citizens because they're here illegally. And we're not realistically going to be able to deport them. So we have to find a way to ensure that those individuals can pay a fine, get online to become citizens, because we need to ensure that they are able to assimilate as other groups have done. they have to meet the same standards that other groups have done. That's why I call my book One Nation, One Standard.
So there's some people like Mr. Tancredo, the Republican congressman from Colorado, who wants to have more draconian methods regarding immigration. You have the President Bush proposal. Which proposal do you
Well,
favor?
none of those are going to work, because the reality is that the people who are coming here are doing it for only one reason, not because they want to come. They're coming here because they need a job. They can't make a living where they are. And in fact, they're being pushed to come here by their own leaders. Let me give you an example. In 2003, Vicente Fox, the then president of Mexico, went on television and he announced as follows. He said, there are 100 million Mexicans, 50 million of you are living below the level of poverty. I don't think within the time I have left in office, I'll be able to improve the situation. So that was a very elegant way of telling the people, get out of here and go to the United States. And the Mexicans have been doing that. A recent poll indicated that 49% of all Mexicans would come here if they could. And that is the problem. The Latin American leaders, including the president of Mexico and the president of the Central and Latin American countries, are exporting the poor to the United States. And what I say in the book is that they have a responsibility to help their own people, that they should set up educational programs, that they should set up economic programs. Instead of sending the people here, they should be improving their conditions so that the people can stay there, which is where they really would rather be.
Do you have any opinion about the Minuteman movement on the border?
Yeah, they continue to come because they're coming here because they need to get a job. And unless something is done, they're not going to be able to do it. That's the problem. To say we're going to put up a border, a wall, you can put up a wall of 100 or 200 or 500 feet. But many of the people who come overextend their visas, or they come through Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic or Florida. So we have to put walls surrounding the entire United States. That is unrealistic.
Let's talk about, speaking about Mr. Tancredo, he is running ostensibly for president at this point in time. In early on, and when you went to Congress, you were one of the 5 Latino members of Congress who established the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Right. Mr. Tancredo recently said that there should be that those caucuses, the Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, should be abolished because I guess in his view that he considered them racist or whatever. He also was complaining that a congressman from Tennessee, Steve Cohen, who replaced Harold Ford in the Senate, Mr. Cohen represents a majority black district, Mr. Cohen wanted to join the Congressional Black Caucus, and he was refused because he's not black. But you point out in your book that back in I believe it was the 90s, a few years ago, when Congressman Gary Franks, a black congressman from Connecticut who was Republican, he was refused admission into the Black Caucus. I mean, do you think these caucuses are still relevant?
Oh, you see, in Congress, there are dozens and dozens of caucuses for any number of issues. Blacks, Hispanics, there are environmental caucuses, housing caucuses, any number of caucuses, probably dozens and dozens. And all of us belong to different caucuses where we would talk about issues that are of concern to us. And then we would, once we identify the issues, go out and try to get support for from the other congressmen. There's nothing wrong with that. That's done not just in Congress, but in every other legislature throughout the country.
Let me ask you about the presidential campaign. You have switched your party registration several years ago to Republican. The campaign is coming up for 2008. Do you have any particular favorite?
Well, yeah, as I mentioned in my book, I thought that Rudy Giuliani proved that he is a very effective man, that he is able to get things done, and we need someone who is competent. And he also showed that he can deal with the crisis. These are the 2 things that are most urgent for the year 2008. show that you are competent and that you can deal with a crisis. And Rudy has those very important qualities.
Well, some people might feel that he sort of fell into that role after 9/11, that, before 9/11, he was very unpopular here in the city.
Well, those of us who knew him and worked with him during the time he was mayor knew he had those qualities before, because he proved competent not just in eliminating crime, but in many other things. He reduced taxes, he reduced welfare, he got rid of the mafia from the fish market. He did many things which people have said could not be done. And he did it without any great fanfare.
But as you well know, I mean, I've heard many people, particularly black people and Latinos, will say, "Look, I will not vote for this man under no circumstances," because they feel that he, again, represented a very unfriendly, if not hostile, face to Latinos and African Americans.
Well, they wouldn't vote for him because he's a Republican, for any Republican for that matter. But the point is, I'm talking about in terms of the general election, what is needed. And what is needed is someone who has competency and who can deal with a crisis. I don't know anyone who is running for office now who has shown those two abilities.
What about Barack Obama, who announced yesterday?
Fine, it's okay, but I've never seen him. There's nothing in his record that shows any great competence or any ability to deal with a major crisis.
One more thing before we go to the telephones, and we'll take a brief break and we'll go to the telephones. Again, you were chairman of the board of the City University of New York during a very turbulent period in its history. Recently, there was a controversy over a sign up at City College honoring two activists. Did you know about what I'm talking about?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Do you have any views about that?
Yeah, I would not have allowed that when I was chairman of the board, and I'm glad that Matt Goldstein doesn't allow those signs up, because those people were killers, and they don't deserve to be honored.
But isn't it the student right to put up who they want to?
No, they don't. It's public property. They don't have the right to put up any sign they want to in any part of the city university. They can put it up if they want to on property that they may own, but not on property that belongs to all of us.
So it's not a violation of their freedom of speech?
No, because it's not their property.
Okay. You've lived here most of your life.
Right.
What is your sense of the city now?
Well, I think the city is a much safer city. It is a city that is growing in numbers, which is very good. I think the population of the city probably is closer to 9 million than the 8.2 that the mayor talks about. And so I would, if I were the deputy mayor, I would move to rezone many areas of the city and to build housing much faster than is being done now.
Okay.
And I also would move to improve the educational system faster than is being done now.
Okay. We're talking with Mr. Herman Badillo, a legendary figure in New York City politics. He's written a provocative new book called One Nation, One Standard, talking about politics as he sees it. It's a bit of an autobiographical story. It's also about politics as he sees it here in 2007. It's out now. Get a take from one of the leading figures in New York City politics over the last 45 years. Forward by Mr. Rudolph Giuliani, and also Mario Cuomo has a very nice view about your book as well. Mario Cuomo, the former governor of New York. First call up for Herman Badillo, and you're on the air. Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
How you doing?
You're fine. Who's this?
My name is Chris.
Go ahead, please.
How's everything?
Yes, good. Question for Mr. Badillo, please.
I don't believe that Giuliani deserves to get the presidency in this country, because he didn't do nothing for New York, nothing at all.
Okay. All right. Thank you. You want to respond to that?
Well, I responded already. He reduced crime, which nobody else had done, and in fact it has been continued, which shows that it was not an accident. He reduced taxes many, many times, and therefore the economy improved and many more jobs came into the city. He got rid of the mafia from the Fulton fish market. He reduced the welfare rolls, and they have remained reduced. And he showed that the city is governable. Prior to Giuliani, nobody believed that the city of New York could be governable. That is an important contribution.
Okay, let's move on. Thank you for your call. You're on the air. Hello?
Hello, yeah, I have two questions for Mr. Badillo, please.
Yeah, go ahead, please, quick.
The first one is, how does he resolve the sort of contradiction that he's advocating government intervention, let's say in Mexico, and redistribution of wealth to prevent immigration to the United States? And at the same time, in terms of the United States, he's saying that we shouldn't rely on government, when in fact, if you look at living standards and violence standards in like European nations that you can compare us to, it's actually the redistribution of wealth that's created social peace in those countries. And the other thing is, I actually taught at CUNY, and I'm not too sure the improvements have occurred that Mr. Badillo is talking about.
Okay, fair question. Thank you for your call. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from the Bronx.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, the answer to the first question is, this is not an intervention. What we're saying is that we have to wake up to the fact that the leaders of the Latin American countries are exporting the poor. In fact, the president of Mexico likes the people coming over here so much and sending money back to Mexico that it has become the second largest amount of money that Mexico gets back from all sources. And so this is the policy, exporting the poor. And we have influence over all those countries because we help them in many different ways. And I think that we have a responsibility to tell them that they have to stop doing that they are harming us, and they have to begin to take care of their own people. There's nothing wrong with telling them they got to take care of their own people. That's what they're supposed to be doing. That's what they've been elected to do, but they haven't done it for hundreds and hundreds of years. As far as CUNY is concerned, you may not think enough has been done, but I've gone into some of the details of the problems at CUNY, but give you one example. There was a book that was written by a reporter by the name of James Straub called City on a Hill about City College. He sat in on a remedial class at City College, a senior college, and he pretended to be a student. At the end of the year, the professor said that out of 22 students, 2, maybe 3, including Mr. Traub, deserved to be in college. The others didn't deserve to be in college at all. But he said he passed them to Mr. Traub because he felt sorry for them. Now, that is not giving people a college education. That is what was going on a mass basis. I mentioned about the percentage of students who got a degree in education who could not meet the teachers, who could not pass the teacher's exam in English. I didn't mention what the president of City College said when I confronted her with the fact that they were giving degrees to students who could not perform. She said, well, they're not good, they're very good teachers, but they're not good test takers. Now, that's a ridiculous excuse. If you're a professor, you should be able to be a good professor and be able to show that you can take the test that you expect the students to pass too. So we presented, when we prepared our report on the city university, known as the City University of Drift, I would advise the teacher who called in, read the report. You'll see there that we have documentation which is exhaustive and which nobody has challenged, that shows that there were absolutely no standards, that the City University had become a second-class high school, and that is something that was a disaster for the students and for the city.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, thank you for your calls. Move on. We have a lot of calls. You're on the air for Herman Badillo.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments.
Please.
First, and a question.
Could you make just a question, please? Just a question, please.
All right. Well,
Thanks.
Mr. Badillo stated about when he teamed with Giuliani and bringing crime down because poverty, I believe he said, wouldn't be eliminated, something like that. He didn't say that it couldn't or that it can't be eliminated. And I think that he's skating over a lot of things. In fact, I don't think any of the policies that he promoted, and especially Giuliani, did anything to help black people in this city and address the needs of black people in this city. Saying that the New York City public school system educates children is a dubious claim. I'm 40 years old. I'm born and raised in New York City. I mean, training at best, and training for what is a good question. And I don't think he addresses any of this.
Okay, all right. Let him respond to that. Look, Mr. Badillo, there's a lot of people who are very, very upset with the mayoralty of Mr. Giuliani. Oh, thank you.
I understand that,
yeah.
But I did say that poverty could be eliminated. Poverty can be eliminated by getting a good education. It's not going to be eliminated by government. And what I said before was that people who said that you could never reduce crime because you could never reduce crime until you eliminated poverty, that they were wrong, because that assumes that all poor people are criminal, which isn't so. Crime is not committed only by poor people. Crime is committed by criminals. And if you want to eliminate crime, you have to go after the criminals, which is what Giuliani did. And he did reduce crime. And the 1,500 and more people a year who are now not being murdered and who are predominantly blacks and Latinos, those are people that have benefited from the Giuliani administration. And I don't see why you cannot understand that, because the city of New York now is much safer than it was during the Dinkins era. When Mayor Dinkins was there, over 2,000 people a year, mostly blacks, mostly Latinos, were killed. I never said the public school system is good. The reason I wrote that the parents should get involved with the school system is because I said the system is dysfunctional. It is not working. It is hurting our children. And because it's not that easy to change, that's why I say to the parents that they have to get involved.
Okay. You're on air. Hello? For Herman Badillo.
Oh, yes. Hi. This is Marilyn from the Bronx.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. What I want to address in the question is best stated by listing the conditions that I wish Mr. Badillo to respond to.
Okay, ma'am. Could you do it quickly, ma'am? Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead, please.
Yes, in reference to education, you only speak of social promotion, and you don't address it all. And I haven't had a chance to see your book yet, but you don't address class size, the lack of textbooks or old textbooks where other schools have new ones, crowded conditions and deteriorating physical plant in many schools, or asthma and other health conditions caused by nearby plants and industrial establishments. You don't address...
Okay, ma'am, is that a question?
Yeah, all of these factors.
Okay.
And then there are problems with the tuition imposed.
Okay, ma'am, let him answer the question. Okay, thank you.
I understand the question very well, and I agree that we need, and I wish you would read my book, One Nation, One Standard, because I talk about many of these things. I agree you need more money. Class size is important. There are many things that could be done to improve the system. However, if you automatically pass the kids, whether they're learning or not, because of social promotion, then you're wasting the taxpayers' money, because they're not really learning. What you got to do is to have a real educational system. And what I say in my book, which you should read, is that we have a two-tier system. It's called tracking. One tier is for whites and Asians who get a real education. The other one is for blacks and Latinos who get an inferior education. And the blacks and Latinos are the ones who are passed without learning anything. And that system has got to be changed, because what it is really segregation within the same school. You got a good school system and you got a bad school system, and that's why I say to the parents, they have to get involved to find out whether the kids are being put in classrooms where there's no learning going on, and make sure the kids get into the classroom where there is learning going on.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Let's see. Let's try a couple more. You're on the air. Hello, for Herman Badillo.
Yes, Dr. Block.
Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
All right. Mr. Badillo, you said that we should get back to the city college. I'm a graduate of Queens College in 1954. I didn't have to pay anything except $6 for a GEO card. You're expecting young Hispanic and black children to pay, and I teach at William Patterson University, which is a state school. It's still expensive. It's almost $9,000 for the year in a New Jersey state school. How can young people, when my family couldn't afford it, even if it was free, how can they get a decent college education with the expenses?
Good. Thank you.
No, I agree with you. I went to City College also when it was free because I couldn't afford to pay anything. In fact, I had to work. That's why I worked full time when I was going to City College. But you may remember there was a New York City fiscal crisis in the 70s. You remember the Daily News deadline, President Ford to City dropped dead. Part of the agreement for getting federal assistance to prevent the city from going into bankruptcy was the imposition of the city university, which of tuition, which I opposed then and oppose now. However, there is a tuition assistance plan, and I would hope that the new governor, Governor Spitzer, would increase the money in the tuition assistance plan so that poor people who cannot afford to pay for tuition will be able to get in without having to pay.
You're on the air. Hello? Hello?
Yeah.
You're on the air.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Listen, Herman Badillo is one of the tragic Puerto Ricans, and of course, I want to like to know where his children went to school. He obviously has not been well educated himself, which is a shame. And also, what is his opinion of Alberto Gonzalez? He's a neocon. We have these kind of turncoat neocons, and Badillo was obviously one, and it's a tragedy.
All right. You've heard that charge before.
Well, I graduated from the City College of New York when it was a great college. I graduated magna cum laude. I graduated from Brooklyn Law School. I was number one in my class. My son went to the public schools. He graduated from Bronx Science, and then he went to the University of Berkeley in California, and he got his PhD at the Graduate Center, so that both of us have been public school, worked our way through the public school system, and that's how we got to where we are.
I mean, finally, and I really appreciate you being on today with us today. I really appreciate it. I mean, you obviously know that you made a big change in your life politically, and because you at one point were one of the leading liberals in this city, and now you've turned, become more conservative. Do you feel any pangs of regret about that, or no?
No, because the fact is that the ones who have remained with the liberal point of view are going nowhere. And I think the changes that we've seen in the city, the reduction in crime, the improvement in the cleanliness of the streets, the fact that it's now a governable city, came about precisely because those of us changed our point of view. And therefore, I think that was worth doing.
Okay, well, listen, Mr. Badillo, it's an honor to have you here on the program today. You've laid out some very provocative ideas in your book, and you certainly are one of the historic figures in New York and New York state politics, and I really appreciate you being here on Walden's Pond.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, sir. Take care.